our native land.
David Plamondon was born in High Prairie, Alberta and raised in Slave Lake. David is a lifelong tabletop gamer and has been collecting and playing RPGs and board games since the mid-90s. He's currently the team guide for the Metawe Together Limited company, which includes Metawe Games and Metawe Consulting. David has spent the last 10 years of his career building and supporting Indigenous communities throughout Alberta in employment and education-related support roles. Matawe Games is an Indigenous-owned gaming space based in Edmonton. They carry a range of tabletops, RPGs, board games, card games, and accessories for purchase. In addition, they have 2 private gaming spaces available for rent at an hourly rate and open a community gaming space with demo games available for a per-person fee. David, welcome to our native land.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here today.
Yeah, thank you so much as well. So let's get right into it. David, can you take me back to the moment when you decided about opening up this gaming and retailing space? You know, tell me a bit about the passion for gaming behind this decision.
Yeah, so we got to go back to April of 2019. My business partner, Jade, and I had started a consulting business, Metawe Consulting. And our initial vision for the consulting business was to utilize tabletop games as a way of helping develop key life skills, particularly for Indigenous youth in remote communities. And so Jade's background is really focused on youth work, not youth work, but working with youth rather, developing workshops, doing community engagement, that sort of thing. And of course, my passion for tabletop games. So we saw a really perfect marriage of those two skill sets and passions, and decided that, you know, we'd pursue this work. So we started developing workshops. We worked with a lot of community organizations. We developed some pilot projects, utilizing some core games that we really liked for skill development. And as we kind of evolved and grew that business line or that vision, we realized that we wanted to expand and be able to support Indigenous community organizations, libraries, and schools by being a resource for them to be able to buy those games for the classrooms, for the communities. And so we started reaching out to board game distributors in Canada, and we basically hit a brick wall. The 2 major distributors in Canada, they both said, "Hey, what you're doing sounds really cool. We really support it, but we can't do business with you." There's a very restrictive nature to board game publishing, and publishers want to make sure that you know, their games are being sold to the proper channels, which is traditionally brick and mortar retailers. So we spent kind of 2019 developing the workshop model, and then it was December 2019 that we finally sat down and said, like, we're going to be limited in being able to do this. I don't want to have to go to Walmart or to, you know, our local board game store and buy 15 copies of whatever board game we want to run for workshops. And we know that wear and tear, especially with youth, is going to be high. So we need to figure out this distribution channel. So we had a little 400 square foot office, and we turned about a third of it into a private gaming space. And we reached out to some community gamers and said, "Hey, like, what kind of feedback would you be giving us, or what would you be looking for if we were offering a curated gaming space?" And so we built a small little community, probably about 20-30 people we had in that little space, not all at once, obviously.
Yeah.
And got a lot of feedback, and we were lucky early on. One of the distributors was willing to work with us even in that kind of abridged little 400 square foot office. And so from there, we reached out to the Alberta Indian Investment Corporation, which is an Alberta-based nonprofit that supports Indigenous investors. And we applied for the Status Entrepreneurship Assistance Program grant. And so they provided us some grant funding to expand. And it was about a year-long process between the grant, between finding the right retail space, between kind of getting all the renovations. So we moved into our new location here on Alberta Avenue in Edmonton in November of 2020. And we officially did our grand opening March 3rd, I want to say. So it's been about a week now since we've been officially open.
And I can only imagine doing all this in the year of 2020, trying to get all this stuff figured out and get a retail location and work with COVID regulations. And I know Alberta, especially, there was times where like everything was shut down. So tell me briefly how that was like for you.
So we were pretty clear from the very start. So because we've been operating since April 2019, we went into the pandemic already operating our main line of business, which was consulting. So our number one priority has always been protecting our staff, making sure that our staff is safe. And then as we expand into retail, we want to make sure that our community of gamers and visitors to our space are safe as well. So, you know, it's definitely had its challenges. But because we do have those 2 lines of business under the Metawe Together, which is the corporation, you know, we don't have to rely rely specifically on a certain metric of retail sales. You had mentioned in the intro there, we have the community gaming space and the private gaming rooms. Those, of course, are not open right now. Those are things that we have set up, but we're not offering that service to customers.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But with the consulting work, a lot of what we do actually, and you mentioned in kind of the pre-interview, we do a lot of Zoom facilitation. So we were early adopters in moving into video conferencing. So it's actually been a bit of a boon for us in terms of the consulting work, because we were able to parlay that expertise and that skill set into supporting the Treaty 6 and Treaty 8 nations that are in our areas in Alberta. So, it was actually kind of a blessing in disguise, just for the consulting side of the business, because it kind of helped cement a little bit more of our fundamental work that we can do. And it also helped propel those workshop models forward and our gaming space forward, because we moved all that online. So we've done online workshops. We offer online drop-in games for role-playing game players. So, it showed us early on that as a small, nimble business, we have to be able to kind of pivot and be able to adjust how we approach things. And I think because we're so small and because we're so new, it was a really good learning experience for us to say, hey, this pandemic is going to change how we do business for at least the next couple of years. So rather than struggle and suffer, which we've seen a lot of larger businesses do, let's just figure out how we can navigate it and how we can make this work for us.
It definitely sounds like you weathered the pandemic good so far. So congratulations there. That's for sure. In the description of your Facebook page, you have stated that you're an Indigenous-owned gaming space, where your priority is to provide a space of safety and inclusion for those in the 2SLGBTQIA plus community. That's a mouthful. And people of color and other marginalized groups. So can you tell me why it's so important to create this space? And are there not other gaming spaces that provide this kind of safety inclusion, that you're advertising? Did you see a market for this?
So what I've learned, having done a couple other interviews, is that this is a very loaded question.
It is,
so
yeah. I was having trouble just getting it out. So,
so what I'll say is that for me personally, like, I am Indigenous, but I wasn't raised with a lot of traditional cultural teachings. But one of the things that was really always instilled in me from my family is that, to me, being Indigenous, part of being Indigenous is meaning that Indigenous people are welcoming to everybody. We're all one people. It doesn't matter what your racial background is. It doesn't matter what your cultural background is, your gender identity, your sexual preference. We're all people. And so, to me, when we started talking about Metawe Games, it wasn't like we sat down and said, well, what can we do different or what can we do better? It wasn't like we were looking at the gaming landscape and saying, well, this game store doesn't do this or that game store doesn't do that. It wasn't about any of that. We weren't really concerned about what other game stores were doing in terms of inclusivity or whether or not they were inclusive. It was really a matter of identifying what we want to do and how we want to approach the gaming space. As a cisgendered straight male, I am Indigenous, but unless I'm out in the sun for a couple of weeks, I tend to skew a little bit lighter skinned anyway. So, I have a privilege that a lot of people don't have. So, I can say with my experience that, every gaming store I've been to has been, ranging from apathetic, which is, kind of the cliche stereotype for game store staff, to friendly. I've never really had any bad experiences at any gaming stores. But one of the things that I've seen come up around the discussion about our approach is that a lot of people fail to understand the difference between being actively inclusive and not being actively exclusive. So, you can be somebody who is, female identifying or, on the LGBTQ plus part of the community, a person of color, and maybe you don't feel actively excluded from those communities, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you feel actively welcomed and included. And so the response that we've got from just kind of taking that public approach of saying we do support the BIPOC community, the LGBTQ plus community, that we want those people to feel comfortable, to feel safe, and not only that, but feel that we're working to making the space be welcoming to them. The response that we've gotten from a lot of members of those communities is that, this is something they don't see. Particularly vocal was the Aboriginal community or the Indigenous community, saying like, it's nice to have a space that, is actively working towards making them feel welcomed. I've also gotten a lot of flack for, people, presumably non-Indigenous people, saying, well, what does it matter that it's Indigenous-owned business? And my response has basically been, well, if it doesn't matter to you, then it doesn't matter. You don't have to think of it as an Indigenous-owned game store. You can just think of it as a game store. But I can speak from personal experience and saying, and I know that you've had other guests on the show say this, that there are a lot of young Indigenous gamers out there that don't feel like they are represented in the community. They don't feel like they're actively welcomed in the community, and they don't feel like there's a place for them in the community. So for the people that don't care that it's Indigenous owned business, great. Just come in and say the game store. You know, you don't have to be Indigenous to come into the game store. You don't have to we don't only stock Indigenous games, but you know, there are people that matters to. And that's what's important to us, is making sure that the people that it does matter to know that it also matters to us. And if it doesn't matter to you, great. It doesn't have to matter to you.
I think that's such a healthy approach too. And I think there's a lot of groups that are marginalized, and, you know, sometimes, you know, they're happy just to mix with everybody else. And sometimes they're really looking for, you know, this circle of people that they can relate to. I mean, why not find a circle of people that you can relate to and have fun while doing it? It just provides more conversation, in my opinion, at the bare minimum, right? It makes it more pleasurable, you know?
Well, and my background is in HR as well. And like, you know, diversity and inclusion is so core to the HR thing. And because people of different perspectives and different backgrounds bring so many different things to the table. And in my case, I'm talking the literal table, the gaming table. So I want to have gaming experiences with people of all communities and all experiences, all life experiences. I don't want a monotheistic experience with, you know, 5 people that all have the exact same, you know, experience, life experiences, backgrounds, etc.
Yeah, it makes for a funner game, right? Funner game, is that right English? I don't know, Kyle. Maybe we should. Okay, so there are many Indigenous-owned business. Are there many? We're gonna try that again. Are there many Indigenous-owned businesses in Edmonton, David? I'm curious to see whether, you know, if you're far and few in between. Have you had support from other business owners or other tribes in the Edmonton area?
So this is another reason why I think it was so important for us to identify as an Indigenous-owned business. So if you had asked me that question 2 months ago, I would have said no, or I'm not sure. But since we've opened, since we've been very public about our opening, we've had a couple Indigenous-owned businesses reach out to us. So right across the street from us, there's a new food place called Teepee Treats, which specializes in Indigenous-themed cultural food. So we've definitely actively reached out to them to see about doing a partnership. Cree Coffee reached out to us, which is another Indigenous-owned business that specializes in Indigenous-sourced coffee. So we're in talks with them about stocking their products in the store here, even though we are a game store. Like, I want to support other Indigenous businesses. Sunshine Promotions, it does promotional items. We ordered our masks from them, and we're ordering some other promotional items. And then, of course, there's the political treaty organizations, so or territorial organizations, Treaty 8 First Nations of Alberta and the Confederacy of Treaty 6 Nations, who we do have, you know, long relationships with even prior to the game store. But what I'll say is that it's really been exciting for me as a small business owner and as an Indigenous person to have, you know, these other Indigenous businesses reach out and, you know, look for ways for us to collaborate and support one another. You know, we're happy to support creators of all kinds. We have a lot of locally created games here at the store. We work with a 3D printing service, who's another local creator, who are non-Indigenous. So for me, just being a small business owner, supporting other small businesses is really important. But if I can support Indigenous-owned businesses as well, that's doubly important to me. And again, it's not a matter of saying, you know, Indigenous businesses are more important, but, you know, the reality is historically Indigenous business owners, Indigenous people have been more marginalized. So if I can do a little bit to help move another Indigenous business forward, of course, do that. And then secondary to that, if I can help move a bit as well.
Okay. You're right there, Kyle. We just had you freeze there, but so sorry if I'm not responding directly back to what you said.
David, can you just finish your thought there? You cut out at "of course," and so if you could just say "of course" and then kind of finish your thought, then I'll just cut that in.
Sure, I lost what my thought was.
So if you're able to support other Indigenous businesses, then of course I kind of know what you're going to say, but just finish that thought.
Yep. Yeah, so of course, if I'm able to support other Indigenous businesses, like, it's not to say that that's our priority, but we'll support all small businesses. But because Indigenous people are so marginalized, we want to make sure that we prioritize supporting those Indigenous businesses where we can.
Absolutely. So to kind of tie into my next question too, you know, what has the reception been like? You said you had a little bit of criticisms, you had some overall support. So let's talk a bit maybe about the fans that have come in, the people that have purchased and supported you so far. What's just the general consensus of your customers so far?
Yeah, I think the general consensus of the people that have actually utilized the store, utilized the online shop, everyone's super excited. We're doing things a little bit differently again because we are a small business. So for Edmonton-based customers, we offer a flat rate $5 delivery. So I've had a couple customers say like, "Is there a minimum?" And it's just like, no, Edmonton's not that big of a city. I don't have a lot going on, which is not true. But if somebody wants to buy something and they want to pay $5, I'll run it over to them. Like, it's fine. And what's really been surprising is we're in the heart of Alberta Avenue. And so for a lot of people that won't necessarily mean anything, but in Edmonton, Alberta Avenue is a very community focused area. It's definitely an area that has a negative reputation, but I think for anyone that's lived or spent any time in the Avenue, I think people recognize that reputation is really misattributed. One thing that's been a shock to me is Edmonton does have a really robust gaming community. And I didn't really factor in how important it was going to be for people living in Alberta Avenue in the community to have a game store specifically in the community. And again, it was really kind of a wake up call to my own privilege as somebody who does have a car, doesn't have any mobility issues. I can drive to whichever game store I want to go to. So I'm spoiled for choice, but that's not the reality for a lot of people, especially people that live in Alberta Avenue. So for a lot of people, having that game store right within walking distance, right in their neighborhood is so valuable. And I think once the pandemic kind of settles down and we can actually have people in the community gaming space, I think we're going to get a huge response from the community to have that community focused area where people can come in and play games together. They can learn about games. I think we're going to see hopefully a lot of youth coming in. This is an area that does have a little bit of a higher, challenges and barriers. So I'm hoping that we can kind of do some of that youth engagement work and provide a space for youth to come in and learn about games and recognize the value and the fun that games bring to people.
Absolutely. I feel like you're just on the cusp of, the business expanding and growing in such a good way as everybody gets their shots and we move past this post-pandemic world, that's for sure.
Yeah, we still have a ways to go before the business is really sustainable. But again, like I said, we have the consulting work to kind of help offset it. And, we're on the right track. But we went into this. I see a lot of people saying, well, this sounds like a passion project. And it sounds like something like, that somebody's just trying to turn their hobby into a career, and frustrates me because, again, we've been building this up for over a year. This is not something I just woke up one day and said, hey, I'm going to open up a game store and, commit to $50,000 a year in rent and, $10,000 a month in salary expenses. So, this was a well thought out business plan. We did our research. We put the work in and we went into it intentionally trying to build something that's going to be unique to what we have to offer and who we are as individuals.
Absolutely. Okay, let's talk about some of the games there. I did notice that you had posted out there that, you have an Indigenous game or two, and people that are Indigenous that have created these games. You even talked about one that there's like this this idea of a colonial theme game where, if colonialism didn't happen, this is what it looked like. And there's a lot of games out there that are given a poor representation, to Indigenous communities in some sense. So can you maybe showcase some information about those games?
Yeah, so the game you're talking about is called Coyote and Crow. So it's a role-playing game, so circa kind of Dungeons and Dragons. Basically, everyone knows that game. But it is designed by a group of Indigenous creators out of America, and then Indigenous artists all across North America, including a couple local to Edmonton here. So the design basically is, like you said, it's a science fiction-based setting, saying what if European settlers didn't come to North America? What if North America wasn't colonized and Indigenous people were able to develop their own technological advancements while still retaining those traditional cultural values that are true to Indigenous people. So it's actually a crowdfunding game right now. So it's actually on Kickstarter. So I would encourage anyone listening to this to go check it out. They have been doing amazing. We're not affiliated with them, but we're huge supporters of them, obviously. I think last time I checked, which is a couple of days ago, they've raised over $500,000 in crowdfunding money, which has completely blown away the expectations that they had. But I think it really speaks to the desire, and it's not just from Indigenous people, to have more representation and more diversity in the gaming hobby. When I look at our own selection of games, there's a lot of common themes. Sci-fi is obviously really popular, and when you do science fiction, you can really blow the gates off of whatever you want to do with aliens and all that stuff. But when you look at non-sci-fi games, the Wild West is a really popular setting. There's a lot of like European-based historical games. Carcassonne, Settlers of Catan is a fictional game, but I mean it's based off of colonization. So it's one of those things where there's not a lot of positive representation. And when you do see Indigenous people in board games and even games that I admittedly love that maybe could be viewed as problematic, one is called Great Western Trail. Indigenous people are just an obstacle as you move along the track, and they're groups that you can either trade with or lose resources to. But that they're basically just a set dressing. They're not there as any kind of meaningful representation. There are some exceptions. Coyote and Crow again is one of the big ones. Another game that we really feature heavily, and it's actually been our most popular seller, I think partly because we're one of the exclusive retail sellers for it, but I think again because there's an appetite for these type of games, is a game called Nunami, which is designed by an Inuit designer out of northern Quebec.
Yeah, I saw that one. That really tickled my interest for sure.
Yeah, and so Tomasi Manjiak designed it, and he is such a passionate person about the game that he designed. He did such excellent work. It's such a beautifully and elegantly designed game. It incorporates Inuit themes and Inuit art, and ultimately what it comes down to is it's a good game. Like that's fundamentally my biggest concern with representation is I want to see more Indigenous representation in games, but I also want the games to be good. We don't want to just bring in Indigenous games because they're Indigenous, but it has to be an actually well-designed and good game. And so Thomas, he kind of hit all of those metrics. It's Indigenous designed, it's Inuit themed, and it's a good game.
That's awesome. I definitely, like I said, when I go to Edmonton next, I want to definitely go in there and look into those games. I definitely want to, stack up the closet and make sure I do have some stuff for a rainy day or when the power goes out, that type of stuff too, right? Okay, let's lighten up for a sec. Quickly, tell me something about your top 3 games that you like, the ones that you're either pushing on the story you really like or just your personal games that you really enjoy.
So that's a really tricky one. I actually brought a couple examples. It's
Am
so
I
tricky
supposed
to pick.
Should I say 5 instead of 3?
No, we'll keep it 3.
Okay.
It's so tricky because like games are so mercurial. They're like movies or music, right? Like it really depends on what mood you're in. But these are kind of my top 3 recommendations for this week. Point Salad.
Oh, background. There we go. Yeah, put it right against your shirt. We'll probably see it. There we go. Yeah.
Point Salad is my kind of entry point game.
Okay.
So what I love about Point Salad is that it's super accessible, and it incorporates a lot of math. So the premise behind it basically is there are 6 types of vegetables that you're collecting, and each card has a vegetable on one side and a scoring mechanic on the other side. So you're just drafting vegetables, and you're drafting cards that will say for every 3 carrots you have, you get 2 points, but you also lose a point for every red cabbage you have. So it's always this complex balancing of like, well, how many vegetables do I need to take? And if I take a carrot, I get points for this card, but I lose points for that card. So it's a game that really reinforces math skills, which I love for youth.
That's awesome. I could see youth that don't like vegetables, but play this game, and all of a sudden they're just going to eat their vegetables.
Or don't like math, and then all of a sudden you make math a competition, and then they really get engaged by it.
Yeah.
And so it's low cost. It's $20. It's very simple to learn, and there's a ton of different strategies at variety, and it accommodates 2 to 6 players. Mm-hmm. This game is kind of on the medium level spectrum. So it's actually a series of games called Unmatched. So I became obsessed with this game. I ordered it kind of almost by accident because I was obsessed with the idea of Robin Hood versus Bigfoot. Mm-hmm. So the premise of Unmatched is that it is a 1 to 4 player dueling game where every person takes on a character. So this set, of course, is Robin Hood versus Bigfoot. I have a set that's Little Red Riding Hood versus Beowulf. We have Jurassic Park versus some mercenary company. So what's wild about it is that all of the sets are interchangeable. So you buy this and you get Bigfoot and Robin Hood, but then you can decide what happens if Robin Hood went up against Little Red Riding Hood, or there's a Buffy the Vampire Slayer set. So what happens if Bigfoot fought Angel from Buffy the Vampire Slayer?
Oh, okay. So you can interchange all these games too. You don't have to play at the 2 that you purchased.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I guess it's been fairly popular. It's been really wildly popular with our team here internally. I've been having trouble keeping it stocked just for my own staff, but they're coming out with a Marvel triple series of Marvel characters as well. So what's interesting about it is the gameplay is really well designed. Again, fairly it's a middle level complexity. It's about an hour to play. But the opportunity to expand with other like historical or literary characters is just through the roof. So they've already got Buffy the Vampire Slayer. They've got a classic monster set with the Invisible Man, Dracula, Sherlock Holmes, and I don't remember the 4th one. And like I said, like the Bigfoot versus Robin Hood. So I'm really excited to see what else they're going to come out with, because it's just one of those games where like you can buy one box set and you have a complete game that you can enjoy. But if you like the mechanics and you want to expand, you can just go crazy with, bringing in new characters and new sets.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And then this one's kind of like it's not the heaviest game we carry, but it's kind of on the heavier spectrum. So it's called Bargain Quest.
Okay.
So the premise behind Bargain Quest is that it kind of flips that traditional, being a D&D player on its head. So rather than playing a character who's going to fight monsters, you're actually playing a medieval shopkeeper that is selling gear to stock for those adventurers. And then the adventurers go and fight monsters on their own.
It's like an entrepreneurial kind of game almost.
Yeah. And so I did enjoy this game even before I opened up a gaming store, but now that I own a little gaming shop, it's really fun to have a little, shopkeeper simulation. But it's just a really well designed, really quick, light game, and just kind of like, I like games that take a traditional kind of genre or cliche idea and kind of flip it on its head. And so Bargain Quest does a really good job of that.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing those, David. Quickly, just before we end the show here, how can people participate, with your business, support you online? I know my producer Kyle just purchased a book from you, and it was pretty easy on your website. Let's dish out the good stuff for the listeners and the viewers today.
So any questions, or if you're looking to get connected, if you're looking to learn how to play role-playing games, we do offer online games. Easiest thing is to email info@pametawe.com. And then, of course, we do have a web shop. So we do ship across Canada. It's flat rate, $14 shipping. And that's pametawe.com/shop, SHOP. We're always trying to increase our inventory. And so we're also taking customer requests as well. So if you're looking for something that you want us to ship you and we don't have it listed, you can always just email us and we're happy to bring it in.
Fantastic. And people can go online on your website. There's some drop-in online gaming that they can do there pretty regularly. Am I not correct?
100%. Yeah. Okay. We do regular drop-in games. And then, like I said, a big part of what we're trying to do is reduce the barriers and increase accessibility into gaming.
Well, David, thank you for coming on Our Native Land. It was an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. It sounds like you know your stuff. You've really put some good planning into this. I'm happy that the business is doing so well, and I wish you all the best. And like I said, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thank you. Like I said, I was so excited to be able to come on and chat with you today.